We're very pleased today to have as our special guest Larry Kudlow. He is Assistant to the President for Economic Policy and the Director of the National Economic Council. He is the 12th person to serve in that position since it was created in 1993. Larry is a native of New Jersey, went to college at the University of Rochester, where he was a member of the tennis team, a very accomplished tennis player. He later got his first job in government working at the New York Fed. From there, he went to Paine Webber, became the chief economist, later became the chief economist at Bear Stearns, recruited to become the chief economist at the Office of Management and Budget under President Reagan in President Reagan's first term. After that, he returned to Bear Stearns, and then later, after leaving Bear Stearns, began a series of television and radio shows known as the Larry Kudlow Report, Larry Kudlow Show. I have often thought naming a show after yourself, I don't know whether that's a good idea or not, but I've come to think it's not a bad idea. So he's become the president's top advisor on economic policy since April when he assumed the position. And in the first full quarter in which he's had this position, the U.S. economy grew at 4.1%. So very impressive performance for the first quarter. So I'm very pleased to have Larry as our special guest. He's going to make some opening remarks, and then we'll have a conversation with him. Larry?
Well, thank you, David. Appreciate it very much. Thanks for having me. Washington Economics Club, you're very kind. I appreciate the turnout. I don't want to spend much time because Mr. Rubenstein is, I'm told, a brilliant interviewer and has many insights, and I want to go there. Let me just begin with a few thoughts. I believe we are or have entered an economic boom. And virtually nobody expected this. They thought it would be impossible. Most people thought 2% growth was the max. I never bought into it. America is basically a free market economy. It's not government run, but government policies matter a lot. And we've had a switch in policies to a incentive model of low tax rates, especially businesses, small business, major rollback of deregulation. The President Trump's own view is to end the war on business and to end the war on success, to end the war on investing, to end the war on risk, essentially to open the economy. And these incentives, you keep more of what you earn, you keep more of what you invest, have been lacking for a bunch of years. And I don't want to go partisan. I'm just going to say a bunch of years. From 2000 to the present, we haven't had a good performance. We've grown 2% or so. I've always believed that the actual potential to grow in the United States, based on historical experience, from roughly, let's say, post-World War II, 1950 to 2000, was 3.5% growth after inflation. And in fact, you can go back to the entire 20th century, including the Great Depression. And the average growth rate, and I know the data maybe is sketchy in the early part, but the average growth rate is scored at 3.5% at an annual rate after inflation. So I'm not satisfied with the low growth. I helped out in the campaign designing some tax cuts, as I say, especially business. In the Reagan years, we had great progress on personal tax reform, a little bit on the business side, but the business side had been lagging. We'd fallen behind. For many years, on my broadcasting shows, I've argued the need to reform the business tax code, large and small businesses, better repatriation terms, and of course, 100% expensing. And I believe this approach, which is beginning to bear fruit, I think this will move us back toward our long-term growth trajectory. With all respect, I have many friends in the Democratic Party. I'm a former Democrat myself, as was Reagan, as was President Trump, for that matter. I just disagree, respectfully, with the idea of secular stagnation. 2% is the best we can do. And I won't get into the grass right now, but I will just say it looks like we have gotten a good leg up in the beginning because these new tax and regulatory rollback incentives are beginning to produce a tremendous business investment boom. Equipment, capital spending, structures, technology, campuses, whatever, retraining. We're getting more capital per worker for the first time, the old K over L ratio. And over a period of years, I believe, and our administration believes, that infusion of capital to make the workers stronger will indeed restore productivity, which have been lagging for quite some time under Democrats and Republicans. And it's starting to bear fruit. As I said, there's a CapEx boom beginning. Productivity showing signs of life. I know it's early in the game. I appreciate that. But it is showing signs of life. We like that very much. One other point I'll make, two quick points, and then David and I'll go. We have seen really a remarkable burst of confidence. And I've been around a while, and I've done this from different sides, government, Wall Street, TV. You look at these confidence charts, whether it's consumer sentiment or small business, NFIB. I've never seen such an abrupt turnaround, V-shaped recovery, almost beginning the day after the election and continuing right up to the last recorded month. And I think that really is a big change in attitude. That confidence number is worth watching. That's the real poll for the economy. And as I say, it's being reflected now in better attitudes, and it's being reflected in more optimism. I'm a firm believer in optimism. I'm the happy warrior, the last of a breed. I learned it from President Reagan. I'm relearning it with President Trump on the newsroom floor at CNBC. I was called the happy warrior. I just won't accept second best. And that's why these new changes, I think, are bearing fruit and will continue to bear fruit. I will just say, and I have a book out, a recent book out. I've written a couple books. The most recent book 2 years ago, it's called JFK and the Reagan Revolution. You can get it on Amazon. Just one click right through. It's very simple. But my point in that book, written by my co-author Brian Dmitrovic, terribly smart historian, was Democrat Kennedy was the first post-war supply-sider, Democrat JFK. And it worked. Worked for, I don't know, we had a good boom of 7, 8, 9 years, and then we went off the tracks, and Republican Reagan came in and emulated and borrowed much of the Kennedy tax rate reduction across the board. Reagan gave JFK full credit. My point is, if you work this model, this incentive model, as I call it, we will get growth. It has worked in the 60s and it's worked in the 80s. It actually, for the most part, worked in the 90s. We had a few glitches there, but finally, Republicans working with Democrat Clinton produced some pretty good stuff. And we kind of got lost in the last 20 years. I hope we are regaining it. The early returns are good. One last point, promise. We'll talk about trade. I know that's a controversial issue. I'm more than happy to talk about trade. I've been deeply involved since I came down here. There's a wonderful piece in my favorite supply-side newspaper, the Washington Post. I guess it ran a week or two, front page above the fold, about the burst of blue-collar employment. And they charted it all the way back. Haven't seen anything since 1984, when I was a Cub Scout working for Reagan. Jobs are proliferating in those sectors, manufacturing and so forth. Energy is such a huge part of our recovery story. More of that later. Paychecks are getting fatter after tax, after inflation, after bonuses, after benefits, according to my dear friend and colleague, Kevin Hassett of the CEA. That's a wonderful thing, blue-collar workers. They've been left behind, they're starting to come back. And I notice other reports talking about higher wages and salaries. Our view, my view, Kevin Hassett's view, if you lower corporate tax rates and related investment incentives, the biggest beneficiary will be the ordinary Main Street working folks. And this is a controversial idea in the academic literature, but it has gained a lot of support in the last 15 years. We're working to that. We're banking on that, and it seems like it's already happening. So I give you fatter paychecks, better blue-collar jobs. I give you a tremendous run of confidence. I think we're going to go on for quite some time. This is not a sugar high. This is a change in marginal tax rates and regulations, which will keep on giving incentives. As David was kind enough to point out, in my first quarter in the White House, we got 4.2% growth. I take complete responsibility for that number. Actually, the Atlanta Fed is just up there. They're at 4.1 in Q3. It come out in a couple weeks. We'd be more than happy anytime it beats 3%, which is our official forecast. President Trump has always said, take a rip at the ball. Take a rip at the ball. I'm behind you, not to punish, but to reward. I think it's working. And so I'll be around a while to help it work. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. So thank you very much, Larry, and thank you for coming here today.
Appreciate it.
So since World War II, on average, we've had a recession every 7 years. We're now almost 10 years into a growth cycle. Now, things can't be much better than they are. The economy is wonderful. But, you know, if you're Jewish, you think things that are always good, something bad's going to happen. And I'm always thinking something bad is going to happen. So when will there be a recession? There's going to be a recession at some point, or you don't think we're going to have one in any foreseeable future?
I'm sure there's a recession out there, the business cycle, but no, I don't see it in the near future. I'm a practicing convert to Catholicism. I have a lot of faith
Okay.
in the Holy Spirit, if not the bureaucracy.
Okay. So,
But my bigger point is I gave a talk last evening to my great friend Ralph Reed's Faith and Family Conference, and a couple of early questions came up about this crash, that crash, and my advice to that person was, you know, I'm not really a betting man, but if I were, I would advise you to take the over. We've been taking the under for too long. Let's take the over.
okay. What about the deficit and the debt? We're running, we have $21 trillion of total indebtedness, and we are running an annual deficit for FY19 projected to be roughly $1 trillion or so. Are you not worried about the total indebtedness and the deficit?
No, not at the moment. No. I've never been much of a deficit hawk, but I understand over a period of time that could be more difficult. Look, David, my point here is not to be some wild-eyed guy with crazy forecasts. I'm just saying growth is going to solve a good deal of that deficit and the debt burden on the economy. If we get the kind of growth we're looking for over a period of 10 years or more, that is going to be an enormous help.
Okay.
And I believe the deficit to GDP ratios will be coming down, not immediately, I get that, but I think they will over time. That's been our experience. But the other factor is there must be greater spending limitation. There's no question about that. Grow the economy, trim spending, go for a more modest government. We've done it on the regulatory front. I think you'll see a tougher line on the spending front.
Now, in the campaign, President Trump took off of the table entitlement reform, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. You gave a speech recently, you said, well, maybe next year we'll take a look at that.
What did you mean?
Yeah, it was a big maybe, and it was what I was trying to say. My dear friend Becky Quick of CNBC, I was saying we are going to continue to reform and erase the vestiges of Obamacare, with which we disagree enormously. And we got the end of the individual mandate. We've also made some regulatory reforms, much more to do, taxes and spending. She was talking about big entitlements long term. I was talking about Obamacare. I didn't mean to imply bigger entitlements. To be very clear, we have no plans to deal with the big entitlements right now. We have enough on our plate with Obamacare. But, let me just raise a couple points real quick. I believe Obamacare was an important entitlement to go after. And secondly, let me make this point. Nick Mulvaney, our OMB budget director, we're all gathering now the early stages of the budget process. He has shown, actually, the biggest part of the deficit is not the big entitlements. It's actually non-defense spending. I'm sorry, it's actually discretionary spending across the board. Now, that includes things like food stamps and welfare, and the president wants workfare put into all these programs, which, by the way, Clinton and Gingrich did years ago, restore that eligibility workfare, cut back, but there's a lot of extraneous stuff in this budget. So we can make a big dent in spending, and I think you'll see this, without worrying about the big entitlements. Let's just look at the bread and butter stuff that goes on every day.
Okay. Now, the economy is doing very well by every standard. So if it's doing so well, why do we need to have tariffs? Because we're already doing so well, why do we need to have tariffs? We're just keep where we are. Why don't we just keep where we are? Why do we need to have tariffs? Because theoretically, we can't do much better than we are.
Well, look, President Trump is a trade reformer. That's his basic point. And I have been known and still am as more of a doctrinaire free trader, okay? I did not approve of the blanket steel tariffs, for example. Art Laffer and I wrote an op-ed when I was out of office against it. But on the other hand, he makes the point that the trading system is broken down. The idea of reciprocity on tariffs and non-tariff barriers has gone away. There's a lot of unfair trading practices. The biggest culprit is China. And that can't be left alone. And there's evidence, good evidence. It's not only China, I might add, but our tariffs are much lower than their tariffs almost everywhere in the world, nearly everywhere in the world. Why should we accept that? Why? I mean, past presidents in both parties have given some lip service to change in China's trading practices, but never followed through. President Trump is following through. And you know the bill of attainder here as well as I do. You've got IP theft. You've got forced transfers of technology because of the ownership problem. They won't let us own American companies or they won't give us licenses. You've got a lot of tariffs on various food and industrial commodities. And the thing is, on the free trade side, I look at this from there, and so does the president. If they lower these barriers and open up markets, we will have huge export sales because the United States is the biggest, most efficient, competitive economy in the world. We actually benefit their consumers and their businesses by doing that. But, you know, China has played fast and loose with the rules. The World Trade Organization needs reforms to enforce those rules. China's taken advantage. They're not a third world country anymore. Why should we have to suffer? That is President Trump's biggest issue. It's like, my point is this. Don't blame Trump. Blame the system he inherited, which was essentially broken. And you've seen now recently, we were able to complete, I have to get this right, USMCA, formerly NAFTA, with a combination of pressure, negotiation. Pretty good deal, in my opinion. May not be perfect, pretty good deal. Certainly the supply chains are intact. We are talking to the European Union again. We are talking to Japan again. We are moving to what I have characterized as a trade coalition of the willing to confront China. They fix, and others need to fix things too. We probably need to fix a few things too. But I'm just saying, President wants a level playing field. He wants reciprocity. Ultimately, he wants zero tariffs, zero non-tariff barriers, and zero subsidies. This may be painful in some cases. Right? He's a disruptor, as we know. But, again, using NAFTA as a good win, and we had South Korea, I believe these things can be negotiated, and I am quite patient on this. It's really been 4 or 5 months. I think we should let him do his work.
Let's talk about USMCA, as it's now called. He didn't like the acronym of NAFTA, and this is a different one. It's harder to remember this one, but okay, USMCA. Okay, you have to actually get it approved by Congress.
Yes.
And you can't use fast-track authority in the lame duck session, as I understand it. So you'll have to get this approved in the next Congress.
You could, David, I think.
Well, you'd need to get 60 votes in the Senate.
That's correct.
Right. So assuming you don't have 60 votes in the Senate for whatever reason, if you use fast track and you didn't need to get 60 votes in the Senate, you'd have to do it next year. Next year, the House could be controlled by the Democrats. Are you
possibly
confident that you can get it through even with a Democratic-controlled House, or you're not sure if you can get it through?
Well, look, what I would say is if Democrats really support the working folks, the middle, Main Street, manufacturing, blue-collar working force, they will support this deal because many of those provisions are aimed at exactly that. All right, you've got the domestic content, but it's NAFTA content, or it's USMCA content, some wage adjustments, some very good adjudication and review procedures. This thing, President campaigned on this thing's about the blue-collar working folks, and the Democratic Party supports that group. They should vote for this. We've met, I've been in these meetings, the heads of the labor unions, good folk, most of them were on my TV show down through the years. They liked it. They weren't ready to totally commit, but they basically were sympathetic, so I think we pick up from there.
Many provisions in this new agreement are taken out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. There are many things that are similar. Would you consider revising the effort to do the Trans-Pacific Partnership and maybe get a new agreement there?
I would say not at the present time. And we do a side-by-side. I think Ambassador Robert Lighthizer may do a presser on this today, but this deal is really much better than TPP in so many different areas. I think our next focus is, well, first of all, China's first and foremost. The process is slowed. We've been very disappointed with China's response. We've made our asks. We're always willing to talk, serious talks, anytime. Maybe Presidents Trump and Xi will meet at the G20 in Buenos Aires. Maybe not. There's some hope about that. We are engaging with Japan on an FTA. We are engaging with Europe on something that might be FTA-like. So we will see.
Okay. Now, you served in the government in Washington the first time, and you were the director of economic policy for OMB. David Stockman was then the director of OMB. Presumably in that position you did not have as much contact with the president as you do now, but how would you compare President Reagan with President Trump in their decision-making and the way they look at economics and other kinds of things?
Well, I work in the White House once every 35 years or so.
Okay.
That's what I do. I love my job at OMB. You have a senior job at OMB, you really learn how the government works. That's where it all comes together. Look, they're two different gentlemen, two different people. Reagan was remarkable. I didn't spend near as much time in those days as I do now. I was in meetings, did presidential cabinet. Just different people, and they are who they are. But I would say this, maybe this is overlooked sometimes by my friends. If you look at the policies, they're very similar. Remember, Reagan was an outsider. Reagan was not a Wall Street guy. He was Californian. his pressure points, policies, and even donors were not Northeastern based. President Trump's quite similar in that respect. You know, President Trump is moving in the red states in the Northeast and the industrial parts that have been ignored. Reagan was the same way. Reagan deregulated. Obviously, Reagan slashed tax rates. Both of them basically believe in free market principles. So they're quite similar, though they have many different styles.
So you are very successful. You have a TV show, you have a radio show, you're presumably... You had. You're very successful in that, and presumably you're making more money then when you were than your government salary, I assume.
By a very small amount.
Right. So how did you all of a sudden get this position? Not that you're not qualified for it, but did the president woo you over a long period of time? Did you want to give up all these things to come in and be flagellated by people in Washington? Why did you want this?
I was pretty surprised. I mean, I had been in the campaign. I've known him for many years. I've interviewed him on both radio and television. I worked with a bunch of folks, Steve Mnuchin and Steve Moore and Steve Miller and so forth, Art Laffer. We helped on the tax side particularly. But no, I didn't expect it. I didn't seek it and so forth. And I guess last March, I have a place in Connecticut on the weekends. I'm driving home from tennis in the afternoon. White House operator calls. I pull over to the side. We don't have near enough cell towers in Connecticut. And we talked for about 30, 40 minutes. And he says he's going to call me back the next day, and he did. And he says he's going to call me back the next evening. And he did. We had long talks. That Tuesday evening thing, I was at a Midtown restaurant with a bunch of pals. Saw the thing come on. I walked outside. Unfortunately, it was cold and raining. And he was talking about a lot of things, and he was actually sort of mapping out some of the things he would ask me to do. And I had to get home to do a radio show. But I think I said, sir, are you offering me a position? He said, yeah, absolutely. You're my guy. Congratulations. Let's start right away. And I love him for it. That's pure Trump. And as I say, we have a good relationship going back through the years. So I will say this, look, to me, this is first and foremost a great honor. And it gives me a chance to weigh in and work as an advisor and as a manager of the NEC, which cuts a wide swath, on issues that I've been working with for many years, in some sense 4 decades. It's an honor. And I have to tell you, most days, really, it's the most fun I've ever had, if you want to know the truth.
Well, let me ask you this. I worked in the White House when I was in my late 20s. You worked when you were in your 30s, I guess, or so before. Mm-hmm. Now you are over 70.
Mm-hmm. Barely.
Barely. Many White House staffs are filled with younger people. Do you feel, like you're a little older than the other people, and can you keep up with all this, these young people in the White House?
This is ageism discrimination at its worst.
I'm almost your age, so.
I know. I'm going to get to that. Look, we have, as you said, we have a tremendous crop of young people, by the way, just tremendous. And, part of my career down through the years and now is I'm a talent spotter. I try to bring kids along. Many of them come to me for advice, and I love it for that. I just love it. But there are some graybeards, quite a few graybeards around. As I say, there's still a bunch of Reagan people that I met as a child with Reagan, like John Bolton or Bob Lighthizer or Tony Dolan. There's a bunch of us still hanging on for dear life. The president himself has as much energy as I've ever seen. The guy's indefatigable.
All right.
So, no, it's
That's not an issue, but early in your tenure, you did have a heart problem, and you fortunately have recovered from it. How did you know you actually had a heart problem, and did you ever have any history of this, and are you not worried about the pace you're keeping up with in the future?
No, I mean, I'm very blessed. It was very mild. Walter Reed took care of me wonderfully. I had some stents put in. I think of them as spark plugs to give me new energy. I have more energy now than I probably did for years. So I just say beware.
Okay. All right. So,
And they did good. I will just say, if any of you have a heart problem, go to Walter Reed. They're very good at it. And I was lucky. I was in hospital for 2 nights.
okay.
The president tweeted from Singapore, which was a lovely, thing, but people kind of
He kind of outed you initially.
he outed me. We had just come back from G7,
Right.
and I was deeply involved in writing communiques with the leaders around me, and my own president giving me eye signals, yes or no. I don't know if that helped, but in any case,
You're
I'm
fine.
fine. I feel
Good.
great, and I'm
Okay.
very blessed.
The best way to get the president to make a decision, is it through a memo? Is it a meeting? Is it one-on-one? How does he make decisions on economic policy?
Well, all three, but principally in small meetings. He loves the give and take of the discussion. He's very knowledgeable. He has very strong business instincts. He's very hands-on. He's a very decisive executive. And where there are disagreements, as there are, he likes to see the discussion right in front of him, and he's cross-examining everybody.
Okay. Now, if you're a business person and you want to influence the president on economic policy, what's the best way to do it? Is to get a one-on-one meeting with him? Is it to go work through you? Is it to send him a position paper? How do people influence him?
Lord knows they can work through me, and one of the blessings of this job is I've met 1 million folks in business. I knew many of them before, but I'm meeting new ones. Having dinner with him is great. By the way, you can call him. He's remarkably accessible.
What's the number they got? So,
I mean that. It's interesting. He's, to his senior staff, and these, we have policy time with the president, he is remarkably accessible, really. And you can do that one-on-one. We like to do it more in small meetings. We have a great team, and we have good team play and a very well-managed process by the chief, General Kelly. But I tell you, he takes a lot of calls at night. I've gotten a few, some of them happy calls, some of them less happy calls. So he's very accessible. You just dial him up, David.
is that 456-1414?
It still works.
All right,
It
try
still
that. I'll
works.
try to get through.
When you say this is David Rubenstein on the line,
Right, I
you
doubt
go
that.
right through.
So I doubt it. Right through where? I don't know. But okay. So today, how would you say you've changed the economic policy process from Gary Cohn? He was there for about a year. Have you changed it, the same staff, or have you made changes?
First of all, in my opinion, Gary Cohn did a very good job. A friend of mine, and was enormously helpful for my transition. Very, very helpful. And I think he had a good staff. We have made some staff changes, but no thorough house cleaning. National Economic Council, terrific shop. We are the free market guys in that building, and I'm proud of it. I work personally very hard with the staff because, yes, I'm doing a lot of media work and so forth, and yes, you're in the Oval with the president, but so much of the days,
Right.
you might imagine from your experience, you're doing the committee work and the meetings, which is tough going, but it's essential. So I don't think I've made any
Okay.
radical changes. I would NEC, which is a fabulous place. We work with everybody. It's interagency, and we will have a policy opinion at the end of the day, but much of what we do is discussions and brokering information and having calm meetings to get everybody's point of view and then present it to the president.
Okay. And so when you present things to the president, do you typically send him a memo first, or do you just go in and talk to him?
Yes, you have to go, right, you got to put some kind of either informational, preferably decision-making memo. It'll go through staff sec, and then we'll go into the meeting and have it.
So have you found that now that you're in this position, people laugh at your jokes more? You've got business people telling you how much smarter you are than they used to tell you. Have you found life is much different?
So, I've always had kind of a wise-ass sense of humor, so Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. I'll be honest with you, it's funny. In my particular situation, down through 20 years of TV anchoring and so forth, you do learn to ask questions and interview people. I found that to be very useful in all these meetings with men and women from business, other agencies, my own staff. I try to bring it out of them so I'm informed. I'm kind of a hands-on guy on these issues. So
So I have a future, I could be an economic policy person in the future too, right?
you need a little more TV work. But
TV work, okay.
it could be.
So when you have a TV show and a radio show as you did, and I listened to it and watched it from time to time.
Thank you.
You can say pretty much what comes into your mind. Sometimes you make a mistake, but it's not like the world moves one way. If you say something you regret a little bit. Now, how do you resist the temptation to say whatever you want to say, because now you have more constraints? Is that a challenge?
Sometimes, but I still pretty much say what I want to say. I mean, I will say this. In terms of my relationship with POTUS, he wants, I believe, and others have reinforced, he wants me to give him my best shot. That means we will agree on many, many things. We may disagree on some things. He loves disagreements and going back and forth. You've got to be ultra respectful as his position, president, and I enjoy that very much. That's kind of the way I am. I've always tried to be a bridge builder. I'm not hung up on political labels. On the air for many years, I made some great friends in both political parties. I'm not saying I was perfect. There's a few I'd like to have back. I've actually apologized to guests on the air if I felt I was too aggressive, but that's my style. I'm not, look, if I have you on the show, how the hell, you never came on my show. How'd you
I was not
escape
invited, but I'm happy the next time you have a show.
that? All right, if we never know. But I would say, look, so I invite you, my pal Austin Goolsbee, my pal Jared Bernstein, very distinguished economists on the Democratic side. If I invite them on, I want to hear their point of view. And I try to carry that in my professional life in the White House, the same thing. There are differences between the agencies. You've got a lot of terribly smart people. You don't get those jobs unless you're smart. So I just want to build bridges and hear them.
Now, we've talked about this a little bit ago, and you said it was okay to talk about this. You went through a transformative experience in your life that changed your life for the better. You had been at Wall Street, you had a problem, an addiction issue, and you cured it. How did you do that? And how have you remained so sober for, 23 years?
Yes?
So can you just talk about how that came about and how you've managed to conquer that?
Well, briefly, I was kind of a hopeless alcohol and drug addict. And
Not just beer, just
no,
just
no comment.
okay.
Look, he's a pretty clever guy, isn't he?
Okay. So you had a problem.
So I won't go through the gory details over 6 or 7 years. I will say this, and I've said this before many times. My wife, of 31 years, whom I love dearly, and is a saint, and she, right near the end, at the end, I had lost everything, and she gave me a one-way airplane ticket to Minneapolis-St. Paul Airport. And about an hour north of there is a fabulous, magical place called the Hazelton Foundation. And I spent, 6 months there learning how to live differently, which I needed. I was kind of a high flyer and had enjoyed success. Changing myself, restoring faith. It's not a religious place, but faith in a general spiritual behavioral sense. And it was the greatest experience of my life. It was a turning point in my life, without question. And As I say, once in a while I talk about this on the air, and I say to people, it's never hopeless. It's what I learned, David. It's never hopeless. If you are willing to listen and pull yourself back and take advice and directions from others who have been through it and are sober, you too can be sober. That's what I learned. And later on, by the way, I might add, after many years of being the number one or number two economist on Wall Street in these various polls, when I got out of Hazleton, I had one job offer from my very dear friend and mentor, but very dear friend, Arthur Laffer, who brought Judy and me out to San Diego to live with him for a year or two. And I got well. And God has been very good to me, and he has directed me, and I try, not perfect, I try to follow his directions on a daily basis. And for the most part, it has worked. I go to a number of 12-step meetings. I sponsor folks. I have sponsors. That fellowship is absolutely phenomenal. As I said earlier, I eventually became a Catholic convert and practice. And there is no way, there is simply no way that I'd be sitting here and you would be interviewing me, or that I would have a top job in the White House, or that I would become a professional broadcaster, which was a career. There is no way any of that would have happened were it not for the fact that I sobered up and stayed that way. I am eternally grateful for that. I personally thank God on a daily basis, sometimes during the day.
Well, if you ever like
And I live a life of faith, or I do my best.
Well, if you ever like to convert back, we'd be happy to have you back. But so let me ask you about the Federal Reserve on a less important matter, the Federal Reserve. The president said he wasn't completely happy with the increase in interest rates that Jay Powell has orchestrated, and you have seemed to say, well, that was a one-off comment. Don't take too much into it. Is the president upset about the interest rate increases, and do you regularly meet with the chairman of the Fed?
I do. Jay Powell, good man, very good man. Look, the Fed is independent. They're going to do what they're going to do. I've been through this a few times in government. The president has his opinions, and he gives them, which is great, but he's never, he said he's not forcing them, pushing them, or trying to apply any pressure.
Right.
He's just giving them his views. I'm not going to comment on, the Fed interest rates, but I will say this, much to my pleasure, I think Chairman Powell, in his speeches and so forth, has made it clear that a lot of the old models have not worked and are being reviewed. And in particular, one of my key points down through the years is that economic growth is not by itself inflationary. This Phillips curve stuff, got to be changed, been disproved, the data don't support it. Moreover, not only more people working with more success and higher wages is a good thing. We need that. This is the working folks, and that is not inflation. I'm a Friedmanite going back a million years.
Right.
Too much money chasing too few goods. Nowadays, you can't use M2 or something.
For those who didn't take Economics 101, the Phillips curve basically says that
Unemployment
goes
versus
down,
inflation.
inflation goes up.
By the way, Phillips himself never really said that. He merely said that lower unemployment will boost wages. He never said it would cause generalized inflation. That came with the new Keynesians in the 1960s. Okay. My view has always been a monetary view of inflation. If you create excess money, and nowadays you would see it, let's say the dollar was collapsing, or the tip spreads in the bond market were expanding. Commodity signals are very important. I don't see any of that, by the way. And Chairman Powell has referred to that, much to my pleasure, and I think he's rethinking a lot of old shibboleths.
Now, many people say that budget deficits matter, but a lot of economists don't say that trade deficits matter that much. Obviously, the president has a different view. Have you tried to tell him that trade deficits aren't viewed as that important by economists, or he doesn't really care about that view?
Yes and yes.
Okay. And with any progress? Modest.
Modest.
Okay.
We have these discussions. And again, you got to understand my view on trade. To me, lower trade barriers are pro-growth. That's part of the supply-side model, pro-growth. And I sincerely believe that his view is the same.
Right.
And if we open markets and get the reciprocity and, try to go for zero tariffs and non-tariff barriers and so forth, we will benefit enormously. America is so competitive now. Capital is flowing here from all over the world. It's really quite remarkable. I talked about the confidence before. We're killing it. Men and women in our economy are killing it right now. We haven't seen this in almost 20 years. So if you open a market and give us a chance, we will pour right through it. And I believe that's the president's view, absolutely.
Okay, well, the economy is doing well. Everybody agrees with that, and nobody sees it ending anytime soon. But if you take credit for the economy being good, when a downturn occurs, how can you avoid being blamed for it? In other words, if you say, I'm responsible for the great economy, and then when it goes down, how can you say, well, I'm not responsible for it? You ever worry about that?
I've never actually said I'm personally
Okay,
responsible.
not personally, but the president has sort of mentioned it.
Yes. My view down through the years, David, is, I tend to get one big thing right about every 15 years or so.
Okay.
And I think I'm onto something right now. Yes, of course, the business cycle is not going to be repealed, and we will have recessions. But look, remember this. Basically, from about 1980 to 2000, we had a couple of very mild, barely perceptible recessions. I'm not saying stocks don't fluctuate, but really, economists look at that. They were very mild. That chapter ended, regrettably, in 08 and 09. But there's no reason why, if you have good policies and you have confidence and you have some optimism and you have some good leadership, yeah, we will go through the vagaries of the business cycle, but it doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter.
All right, the next Congress, whatever the Congress is, Democratic, Republican, whatever split, what legislative priorities in the economic area would you like to pursue, or the administration will pursue?
Okay, good point. We're working through that now. Budget stuff's coming toward the back end of the year. We will continue to emphasize the need to maintain and possibly improve the tax reforms that we've undertaken. We will continue to move on the deregulatory track. We will continue to have maybe even greater emphasis, David, on energy deregulation. We will and are becoming the dominant energy player in the world. We're running about 11 million plus barrels a day. We're ahead of Saudi Arabia. We're going to take Russia. A lot of the inside estimates in the agencies in our government is suggesting 15 million barrels a day in 2020. But the real thing here is the natural gas revolution. And all this comes from the fracking and so forth, the horizontal drilling. The natural gas thing is off the charts. We had a fellow in yesterday, won't name his name, we had a fellow in yesterday who runs a gigantic utilities company out west. He's mostly doing nat gas in the Permian Basin. And he's got more than he knows what to do with. And they're burning it off. Flaring is the word. And he went through the numbers. I had him come in and speak to the president. We are so cheap and so efficient that we, even with shipping costs, which is how it's being done to get to Europe, for example, we are very competitive with Russia. We may underbid Russia. Now, they may subsidize it, blah, blah, blah. But we're just, and every European country wants LNG. Asia wants LNG. There may even come a time when China wants LNG. That is a revolution.
Right.
which had been stifled for so many years. And part of that, to answer your policy question, is we need infrastructure, including pipelines. We need east to west. We need west to east.
Why is it so hard to get infrastructure legislation? No one seems to be able to do it in the last decade or so.
The states have some problems, but we also have some leverage at the federal government. So you'll see a lot of infrastructure talk, pipelines. By the way, it's not just pipelines. It will be the building out of whole areas like mini cities, schools, shopping. That's the way these big companies are looking at it. I think it's absolutely fantastic vision.
You've talked about energy prices, or energy, and we're booming. We're the biggest oil producer in the world now. So when the president says OPEC has prices too high, some people say, well, wait a second, we're the principal beneficiary now of high prices because we're manufacturing. What did he really mean when he says OPEC has prices too high? Because we really have the prices high too.
Well, it's interesting. You're right. Nowadays, unlike the 70s and 80s, we are winners and losers when the price goes up and the price goes down because we've become huge producers. I'm not going to get up here and spat out oil forecasts. I believe, I've always taken the Milton Friedman position, world markets will work and assert themselves over time. So as we evolve into the major energy player, I think prices will respond to supply and demand and production inputs. By the way, I don't want to leave out on the energy story, besides oil and natural gas and LNG, we have made it easier for coal companies to restore, rehab, clean up. We're trying to make it easier for nuclear. We don't have any particular biases against solar. I think it's too expensive in the open market, but whatever. There's no bias. We want a level playing field, by the way, not subsidizing one side and not the other. And I think you'll see a big infrastructure push as new policies come
Recently,
about.
Amazon announced that it was increasing its minimum wage for its employees to $15. I think you publicly said that was good. I didn't hear the president say anything good about Amazon, but you think he might, or?
In my lifetime. It's possible.
Possible, okay.
I applaud.
Okay.
See, I just have this peculiar view. More people working and prospering with higher wages they are earning is a wonderful thing. Wonderful.
Okay.
Wonderful.
All right.
All right? It's not inflationary. It's not overheating. And as I said to you earlier, we are now incentivizing the new capital investments to make the workforce even better with productivity. I think it's fabulous. Now, I don't want the federal government to tell these private companies what to do, but if Amazon, making money, wants to give $15 an hour, God bless them.
Now, we didn't talk about the dollar yet. I know the Treasury Secretary is never supposed to talk about it, but there's no rule that says the head of the NEC can't talk about the dollar.
Yes.
So do you have any views on whether the dollar is too strong?
My sense is the dollar has been steady and stable and reliable. Secretary Mnuchin has the same view. That's just how we want it.
Okay.
How's that?
That's going to not get you in any trouble. Okay. So let me ask you, you're obviously well regarded within the White House. At some point after the midterms, the president might say there's a cabinet vacancy. Would you want to be in the cabinet in any way, or you're happy with your current job?
I love my current job.
And
I serve at the president's pleasure. I mean, David, back to your early attacks on me regarding ageism.
there was a tax on me.
Well, I know, we share.
Right.
Lovely experience. I'm too old to pad my resume. I don't have ambitions on this stuff. I've been around. I will serve him best I can. And I just love what I'm doing.
Whenever this comes to an end, at some point, 3 years, 4 years, whatever, however long you might serve, or he might be reelected, you might serve, would you go back into the broadcasting world? Would you want to go into the higher calling of private equity, or you're not sure?
That's wonderful. You know what I would say, to be honest, I don't know.
No. Okay.
I mean, my life and career, all these years, my ups and downs, I'm a lucky guy. I'm a blessed guy. And in my view, it's God's will. He will decide, and I just want to show up and do the best I can, and He will lead me. Look, I've had career, I mean, I was a Wall Street economist, I was a Fed economist, Wall Street economist, TV broadcaster. Now I'm back in policy and politics. I don't know.
All right. Well, I want to thank you for your service to our country, and let me give you a small gift if I could. Thank you. This is a map of the original map of the District of Columbia, and we will send it to your
You got
office.
some pics?
Okay?